What I'm about to describe happened just over a year ago, right around Christmas. And even now, it's something that still sits heavy in my chest whenever winter settles in over the mountains. My wife and I live full-time in a small house tucked into the Appalachians. Far enough from town that you don't see neighbors, but close enough that we'd never thought of ourselves as truly isolated. We chose the place for the quiet, for the kind of silence that feels earned after years of city noise. We both grew up in these mountains, but when we got married, we moved to Denver because of a job opportunity. Over the years, though, the desire to return to the mountains kept growing. So once we reached a certain level of financial stability, we made the decision to come back. We've lived in this house for 11 years, and although we've had a few scary or difficult situations before, nothing ever came close to what happened this time. Winters are harsh up there, but we were used to it. Snowstorms, power flickers, long nights where the world feels paused. None of that was new to us. That night started like any other winter evening. We'd stocked up earlier in the week knowing a storm was coming. By late afternoon, the snow had started falling steadily, thick flakes driven sideways by the wind. By dark, the house felt sealed off from the rest of the world, a feeling that can be both beautiful and unsettling. The trees around us bent and groaned, and the wind pressed against the walls hard enough to make the place creak. We locked up early, not out of fear, but out of habit. When you live in the mountains, you learn to live more in tune with the rhythm of the days and the seasons. We lit the fireplace, turned on a couple of lamps, and settled in, thinking it would be a quiet night of waiting out the storm. The first thing that unsettled me wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the feeling that the space outside the windows had changed. Something I've heard said many times, and completely agree with, is that when you live in places like this, you learn to notice when things are out of place. The small signs that something is wrong, even when they don't make logical sense. You learn to listen to them and pay attention. And that's exactly what happened in that moment. I knew something wasn't right. The snow muted everything, but beneath that silence, there was something else. Something I can't quite describe. I kept glancing toward the front of the house without knowing why. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the storm playing tricks on my nerves. Then we heard footsteps. At first, they blended in with the wind and the shifting snow on the roof. But once my brain recognized the rhythm, there was no one hearing it. Slow, deliberate steps crunching through snow. Too heavy to be an animal. Too controlled to be random. They stopped just outside the front door. We stayed completely still. In 11 years of living there, we had never experienced anything so deliberate. Someone approaching the house like that, at night, in the middle of a storm. My first thought was that someone had gotten lost in the mountains and had come looking for help. But at the same time, there was an instinctive sense of distrust. The house suddenly felt fragile, like a thin shell in a vast, hostile landscape. Whoever was out there didn't knock. They didn't call out. We waited, expecting to hear something, but nothing came. We knew the person was still there. Maybe they were hesitating about approaching a house like that at night. We waited longer, and every second I expected to hear a knock. But it never happened. Instead, they tried the doorknob. That simple action made me jump off the couch. My wife had her hand over her mouth, half horrified at the sight of someone trying to open our front door. That was the exact moment when the fear became real. We were both genuinely terrified, and even knowing that all the doors and windows were locked, it was still just a house, with all its vulnerabilities. What scared me most or the intentions of whoever was outside. I motioned for my wife to come with me, and we went down to the basement where I keep a safe and store firearms. I barely even remember picking them up. I've never liked guns, the ease with which they make human or animal life cheap, as if it has no value. But in that moment, I felt like I had no choice. I was genuinely afraid of the intentions of whoever was outside. Over the next several hours, the person moved around the house. We heard them on the porch, then along the side wall, then behind us where the bedrooms were. They checked the windows one by one. At no point did we open the shutters to see who it was. Sometimes they lingered, as if listening for us inside. Other times, they moved quickly. For a while, we thought there might be more than one person, which made everything even more terrifying. We thought several times about confronting them, about saying we were armed, but you never know who's on the other side, or whether they're armed too. Sometimes we had cell service in the area, but with that storm, I already knew we probably didn't, and that was confirmed. Neither of our phones had signal, and the landline was dead because of the storm. Either way, I don't know how much being able to call for help would have changed anything. It wasn't the first time we'd needed help. Years earlier, we'd actually been robbed while we were away, and the police never came. At one point, something hit the side of the house. Not thrown hard, just enough to let us know they were still there. Still testing, still trying. The wind howled so loudly at times that it almost masked the sounds of movement. And somehow that made it worse, knowing we might miss the moment they actually got inside. The part of the house where they spent the most time was without a doubt the back door, the one that opened directly into the kitchen. It rattled in its frame, and I remember thinking how stupid it was that I'd always meant to reinforce it, but never got around to it. It was clearly the weak point of the house, and I was terrified they would realize that. My wife suggested we go down to the basement, since it had the strongest door in the house. But I was afraid of missing the moment they entered and ending up trapped down there with no way out. I told her I thought it was better for us to stay where we were, but if it made her feel safer to start stocking the basement with food and essential supplies, then having a backup plan wasn't a bad idea. We spent the night like that, caught in a mix of anxiety and fear as the hours dragged on in a slow, distorted way. Time didn't move normally. The fear kept resetting, every new sound bringing it back to full intensity. At some point, exhaustion crept in, the kind that makes your thoughts feel thick and sluggish. But sleep was impossible. We stayed awake until the sky began to lighten, the storm finally easing as dawn approached. Around 7 in the morning, the sounds stopped. Or at least, they seemed to stop. We didn't move right away. We waited, listening, afraid that stepping forward might somehow bring them back. Then, after at least an hour had passed, we opened the window shutters. The forest was relatively calm after the violence of the night before, and there was no one in sight. The only sign that someone had been there were the deep footprints circling the house, partially filled with fresh snow. They were noticeably deeper and more concentrated around the entrances. And it couldn't have simply been someone looking for shelter. The house was clearly lived in. And anyone who could have endured the entire night in those temperatures and that storm would have had to be well equipped for the cold. We didn't leave the house that day, and when night fell, we were both extremely stressed. We could have spent the night away, rented a hotel room and stayed for a few days. But the only hotel anywhere near us was completely full, probably with families who had come back to spend Christmas together. In the days that followed, we kept expecting something else to happen. Some sign that it wasn't over. Every sound outside made us genuinely uneasy. Every night felt like a repeat waiting to happen. We reported it once the roads cleared, but there was nothing to go on. We installed cameras and an alarm system, something we probably should have done a long time ago. But the person never came back. We still live here, and I can't say that we live in constant fear, but I also can't say that we live the way we used to, completely at ease and without worry. Now, whenever I have to go outside, I see shadows everywhere, and sometimes I have the feeling that someone is going to step out from between the trees and attack me. What I'm about to describe happened 7 winters ago, and even now, whenever the cold settles over the Blue Ridge Mountains and the days start shortening too fast, that memory comes back with a clarity I don't welcome. I've lived in these mountains most of my life. Out here, distance is measured less in miles and more in time, terrain, and weather. My nearest neighbors are an older couple who live deep in the forest, far enough away that most people wouldn't even realize there's a house back there. We're all pretty isolated, and because of that, we look out for one another. Whenever something breaks, or supplies run low, or bad weather is coming, we check in. It's just how things work out here. That afternoon, I headed out to warn them about a storm that was rolling in faster than expected. In the summer, the walk takes about 30 minutes on a narrow trail that winds through the trees. In winter, with snow, ice, and frozen ground, it takes closer to 40, sometimes more. By the time I started out, the light was already fading. I wasn't afraid of the dark. Night has always been part of life here. But the storm worried me. The wind was picking up, and the air had that sharp, electric feel that tells you things are about to turn bad. I should have left the house much earlier, but I got distracted with things I needed to take care of, and ended up heading out later than I should have. Still, I didn't want to cancel. At their age, those kinds of check-ins really matter. The forest was quiet in that heavy, anticipatory way it gets before snowfall. My boots crunched steadily along the trail, and my breath fogged in front of me. About halfway there, I became aware of something behind me. Not a sound exactly, more the sense of presence, like the woods had shifted. I stopped for a second, listening. Nothing obvious. No footsteps, no snapping branches. Still, the feeling didn't go away. Out there, no one wanders the trails without a reason, especially that deep into the woods. I started to notice faint sounds off in the distance, branches shifting, snow compressing under weight, but the wind had picked up enough to blur everything together. Gusts tore through the trees, carrying noise in strange ways, making it hard to tell what was real and what was just the storm settling in. I kept moving, telling myself it was probably nothing, just the forest reacting to the weather. Still, I found myself glancing to the right more than once. That's when I saw him. He stood off the trail, partially hidden between the trees. Far enough away that at first I questioned whether he was really there. He was dressed entirely in black, his clothes blending unnaturally well with the shadows. In one hand, he held something long and rigid, like a metal bar or a length of iron, hanging loosely at his side. The moment our eyes met, he stopped moving. For a split second, neither of us did anything. Then, without warning, he lunged forward and broke into a run straight toward me. I was horrified, but I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran as fast as I could. My only thought was the cabin ahead, the neighbor's house somewhere deeper in the trees. I forced myself to aim in what I hoped was the right direction, though panic was already tearing holes in my sense of distance and direction. Snow kicked up under my boots as I pushed harder, the wind cutting into my face, my breath coming fast and uneven. Behind me, I heard him gaining ground. He was fast, unnaturally fast, his footsteps heavy and relentless, slicing through the wind. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. He was closer than he should have been, his movements sharp and purposeful, the dark shape of that object flashing in his hand as he ran. The trail stopped making sense. Trees blurred together. The slope of the ground shifted, and I couldn't tell if I was still heading straight or drifting off course. Fear drowned out everything else. All I knew was that I couldn't stop. If I stumbled, if I slowed down even slightly, I was certain he'd be on me. The forest that had always felt familiar turned foreign and hostile, the wind howling through the branches as night dropped fast around us. Snow whipped sideways, burning my eyes, and my lungs felt like they were on fire. My legs screaming with every step, but the sound of him behind me never faded. He was still coming. Then, through the trees, I saw it. The faint outline of the neighbor's house. A single light glowed in the distance, barely visible through the snow. Relief surged so hard it almost dropped me to my knees. I screamed their names over and over, my voice tearing out of me raw and desperate. For a moment, I was terrified they wouldn't hear me. The wind was fierce, and they're older, their hearing not what it used to be. But then I saw movement at the window. The woman appeared, her face registering confusion. And then immediate alarm as she saw me running full speed toward the house. The door opened, and I stumbled inside just as it slammed shut behind me. The lock clicked into place a split second before something crashed into the door from the outside. The impact shook the entire frame. We stood there frozen as another violent blow hit the wood, followed by another. Whoever it was threw themselves against the door with a fury that felt almost inhuman. I shouted for them to secure everything, to lock the windows, barricade anything that could be forced open. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely help. The pounding continued for several minutes, relentless and enraged, before it suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. We waited, listening, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. But no further attempts came. The storm intensified, wind howling around the house, snow piling up against the walls. They used their satellite phone to call for help. Getting to us wasn't possible, not in that weather and not in that terrain. But the police stayed on the line as long as they could, calm and attentive, giving instructions, walking us through what to do if the person tried to get in again. Luckily, nothing else happened that night, and by morning, the storm had passed. The world outside was buried in white, eerily peaceful. The police managed to reach the house later that day and checked the area, though there was little to find beyond disturbed snow and tracks that disappeared into the forest. The neighbors came back with me to my place, and they stayed there for the rest of the winter. I didn't even hesitate to offer. They're not just neighbors to me. They're family in every way that matters. The thought of something happening to them still makes my chest tighten. That was 7 winters ago. Nothing like it has happened since. But it was enough. Enough to change how I move through these mountains. Enough to make sure I'm never caught out near dusk again. And never, ever in the forest, once darkness has fully settled in. Everything I'm about to tell you was absolutely terrifying. And even now, I know that large pieces of that night are missing from my memory, blurred or completely erased by panic. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean I'm exaggerating. Everything I'm about to describe is real. I just don't remember every detail with perfect clarity, and all I can do is pass on what I know for certain. I was 22 years old at the time, and this happened in December of 2001. Deep in the Appalachian mountains. A close friend of mine and I had this tradition of camping every Christmas season. Nothing fancy or extreme, just a few days off the grid before heading back to our families. It was something we'd been doing since high school, and back then we still thought we were a lot tougher and more capable than we actually were. The spot we chose that year was familiar, a place we'd camped near before, far enough from any main road that you couldn't hear traffic, but close enough that we felt comfortable being there in winter. The first part of the trip was uneventful. Cold, but manageable. The kind of quiet that feels heavier in December, where the forest seems stripped down to its essentials. We set up camp before dark, started a small fire, ate, and settled in early because the temperature dropped fast once the sun disappeared. At some point during the night, I woke up with that instinctive feeling that something wasn't right. Not a noise exactly, more like a shift in the air. The same way you can feel when someone is standing too close to you without seeing them. I remember lying there, staring into the darkness of the tent, listening hard. Every sound blended together. Branches creaking, snow brushing against fabric, the fire popping as it died down. I remember thinking that if the fire was still faintly burning, then it couldn't have been very late, probably somewhere around midnight at most. Then I heard something that didn't fit. A heavier sound, slow and deliberate, coming from deeper in the trees. I couldn't tell how far away it was, only that it wasn't an animal moving randomly. Whatever it was, it stopped when the wind died down, and started again when the gusts picked back up. Like it understood exactly when it could move without being noticed. That sense of intention was the first thing that truly scared me. The deliberate way a predator moves when it knows exactly what it's doing. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to look outside, unzipping the tent just enough to peer out. What I saw still doesn't fully make sense to me. At the edge of the firelight, barely visible between the trees, there was a shape standing upright, completely still. It was tall, unnaturally so, and it looked wrong in a way I still struggle to explain. Not wrong in a supernatural sense, but wrong in a human sense. Like someone trying very hard not to be seen and failing without realizing it. I remember noticing the way it was positioned, slightly hunched, as if it had been watching us for a while. There was no sound or movement coming from it at all. No noticeable breathing, no shifting of weight, nothing. Just a presence that felt intentional and patient. The fear hit me all at once, sharp and overwhelming, the kind that makes your thoughts scatter and your body feel heavy and weak at the same time. The feeling of being watched in the middle of the night is absolutely terrifying, and that kind of fear has a way of distorting your senses. I hadn't even realized that Mike was awake too, staring at the exact same thing I was. I think I only snapped out of it when I felt his hand clamp tightly around my arm. I don't remember how long we stayed frozen like that. Both of us awake now, barely moving, afraid that any sound would draw attention. At some point, the shape moved, with a speed that didn't match its size, disappearing so quickly it made me doubt what I'd seen. That was worse than if it had stayed. The idea that it could move like that, silently, was enough to convince me we weren't safe. We sat through the rest of the night huddled together, the fire barely alive, only feeding it every now and then to keep from being left in complete darkness. Listening to the wind and flinching at every sound. The woods never fully settled again, and neither did we. When morning finally came, everything looked normal. No footprints we could clearly identify. No broken branches close enough to prove anything. We packed up as fast as we could and left without talking much. Both of us clearly shaken but unable to put into words what we were afraid of. In the days that followed, the fear lingered in a strange way, like something unresolved. We talked several times about what we had seen, and we both shared the same strange impression that it looked almost like a person, but far too large, hunched over and generally misshapen. If it had really been a person of that size, it should have left clear marks in the snow, and it hadn't snowed overnight enough to cover any footprints. But at the same time, it didn't make sense that we somehow shared a collective hallucination, both seeing the exact same thing in the same way. We never went back. Not to that spot. Not for winter camping at all. Whatever was out there that night, whether it was just a person or something worse, it was enough to break a tradition we thought nothing could touch.